Have you ever done something you regret and felt that sinking, heavy feeling that didn't just say, I made a mistake? It said, I am a mistake. This distinction has changed my approach to coaching, to motherhood, and to how I talk to myself. Today, we are going to explore the difference between the two and why it is so important to understand. Today, we're talking about shame and guilt. I have been inspired by the research of Brené Brown on this topic, and I wanted to take her foundational ideas and bring them into the work we do here, especially for those of us navigating difficult relationships, faith transitions in our families, and that ever-present inner critic that just won't quit. I have not just studied this, but I have lived this. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Seasons of Joy podcast. I'm your host, Jill Pack, and this is episode number 192, entitled Shame versus Guilt, Why Knowing the Difference is So Important. When I say the word shame, do you notice any kind of internal reaction? Maybe a little tightening, a little bristle, a desire to skip past it? That reaction itself is worth paying attention to, because Brené Brown talks about what she calls the shame 1, 2, 3s in her book, Atlas of the Heart, 3 things that are universally true about shame. And the second one is that we are all afraid to talk about it. Sometimes we feel shame from just saying the word. So if you felt that before, then you are in the right place. Before we get into the distinction between shame and guilt, I wanted to lay some groundwork with Brené's framework, because I think it can bring a lot of clarity on this topic. She talks about 3 things that she believes are true for virtually every human being. First, we all have it. She says that shame is universal. It's one of the most primitive emotions we experience as human beings. The only people who don't experience shame are those who lack the capacity for empathy and human connection. So if you have felt it, and I'm guessing that you have, that's not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that you are fully human. And second, we are all afraid to talk about it. The interesting thing about shame is that the very act of naming it can make us feel it. Just saying the word can create feelings of discomfort. But the more we talk about it, the better we get at finding the language to describe it. And that matters a lot because of the third point, which is the less we talk about shame, the more control it has over us. Shame hates being spoken. It thrives in silence and secrecy. It grows in the dark. And the moment we bring it into the light, by naming it, sharing it with a safe person, and examining it with honesty, its grip begins to loosen. Actually, why I wanted to make this episode, because I think a lot of us are being quietly controlled by something we've never been given language for. So what is shame exactly? Brené Brown describes it as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed, and therefore unworthy of love, unworthy of belonging, unworthy of connection. That's the core wound of shame. It's not just I feel bad about something, it's I'm fundamentally defective, and if people really knew me, really saw me, they would confirm my worst fear, which is I don't belong here. Now here's where the distinction between shame and guilt becomes so important and so freeing. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt is about behavior, a specific action, a moment you wish you could take back. And guilt, when it's healthy, actually motivates repair. It says, that didn't line up with my values, and I want to do better. Guilt keeps us connected, tethered to our integrity. Shame shapes the behavior into identity. It doesn't say, I made a mistake. It says, I am a mistake. And Brené's research is clear. Shame is correlated with more destructive behavior, not less. When we feel shame, we hide, we shut down, we lash out, or numb. It doesn't make us better. It makes us smaller. Guilt is far more likely to lead to meaningful change. So let me show you what I mean with a story from my own life. When I carried something very heavy. When my children started making choices that looked different from everything we'd had built our family around, different values, different lifestyles, a different relationship with faith, I didn't just feel sad. I felt implicated, like their choices were somehow a verdict on me. The story running in my head was relentless. A good mother would have gotten this right. If I had done more, said the right things, been more present, more patient, more consistent, they wouldn't be here. This is my fault. Now this was shame. It wasn't saying I made some mistakes along the way, which is just true of every parent who has ever lived. It is saying I am the mistake. I am the reason. Do you hear Brené's definition underneath that? I believed I was flawed. And because I believed I was flawed, I felt unworthy. Unworthy of being seen as a good mother, unworthy of connection with my kids, maybe even unworthy of grace. I want to name what that felt like in my body because shame isn't just a thought. It is a physical experience. There was a heaviness, like something pressing down on my chest that I couldn't quite shake. And I would carry it into ordinary moments, folding laundry, driving to the grocery store, and it would just be there, this quiet, crushing weight. Shame kept me focused entirely on myself, on my failure, on my inadequacy, and ironically, that meant I had very little capacity left to actually be present with my kids. Shame didn't make me a better mother. It just made me a more hidden one. I had to learn to separate my worth from my children's choices, not to stop caring. I will never stop caring, but to stop letting their journey be the final word on who I am. What I just described, that heaviness, that internal collapse, that's not just emotional, that's physiological. When shame hits, your body doesn't just experience it as an emotion, it experiences it as a threat. Your nervous system goes into protection mode. You might freeze, go quiet, withdraw, disappear from people who matter most. You might go into fawn, over-apologizing, people-pleasing, shrinking yourself to manage everyone else's feelings, or you might flip into fight, defensiveness, blaming, sudden anger that surprises even you. That's why self-awareness is so foundational. It's difficult to work with an emotion you can't name. When you can pause and ask, is this guilt or is this shame? You've already taken the first step towards regulation. And speaking of defensiveness, that leads me to my second story. Phil and I have been married a long time, and if I'm being honest with you, there's a pattern that I've had in our relationship that I'm not really proud of. When he offers input on how I am doing something, even with the best intentions, my defenses go up fast. I've known this about myself for a while, but knowing something and actually doing something about it are two very different things. In one particular conversation, something shifted. Instead of waiting until I was mid-defensive spiral, I brought it up first. And I told him, I know I tend to get defensive when you try to help me with things, and I'm working on it. Now notice what was happening inside of me in that moment. There was discomfort, a recognition that this pattern hadn't been serving us, but there was no heaviness pressing on my chest, no voice saying you are fundamentally broken. It was something quieter and more purposeful. It said, this specific behavior doesn't reflect who I want to be, and I care enough about us to say it out loud. That's guilt doing its healthy work. And the moment I named it, something in the relationship softened, not because I had it all figured out, but because I was willing to be honest. That's the difference right there. Shame collapsed me inward and made me smaller. Guilt moved me toward something, toward honesty, toward fill, toward growth. It's easy to hear shame is bad and assume that the goal is to let yourself off the hook. That's not what I'm saying. It's not what the research says either. True accountability actually requires getting out of shame, because when we're drowning in, I'm terrible, we're too busy defending our worth to actually address the behavior. Shame masquerades as accountability, but rarely produces it. The shift could sound like this. From I'm a terrible mother for how I handled that conversation to I didn't handle that well, and that matters to me because I love her. What can I do differently? The second sentence is connected. It's motivated. It's moving toward repair rather than hiding in collapse. This is where my progress formula comes in. Grace or progress equals self-awareness plus self-acceptance plus self-compassion plus self-trust. You cannot do any of those things well when you are in shame. Shame short circuits the whole equation. And remember, Brené said shame makes us feel unworthy of love and connection. The progress formula is essentially the path back to believing you are worthy of both. I invite you to listen to episode number 149 of this podcast, where you can learn more about the progress formula. So how do we actually do this in a real moment? Here are the tools I use with my clients and with myself. First of all, we want to name it out loud. Remember, shame hates being spoken. The moment you say, I think I'm feeling shame right now, you've done the one thing shame doesn't want you to do. You've brought it into the light. You're observing it rather than being consumed by it. Number 2, regulate first. You cannot think your way out of a shame spiral. Your nervous system has to settle down before your brain can come back online. Use your safety sequence by asking, am I safe? Do I feel safe? And then you relax your body with things like taking 3 slow breaths, putting your feet on the floor, stepping outside. You just want to tend to your body before you try to examine the story. And then you want to ask the guilt question. Once you're a little more regulated, you can ask yourself, is there an action here I want to take responsibility for? If yes, that's guilt doing its job. What's the repair? If you've collapsed into, I'm just a bad person, that's shame. And you can gently redirect. What did I do and what would I do differently? And finally, bring in a witness. Shame cannot survive being shared with a safe person. This is Brené's core message. Vulnerability is the antidote to shame. A trusted friend, a coach, a therapist, someone who can hear your story without confirming your worst fears about yourself. Every single time you do that, you take a little more of shame's power away. I want to speak directly to those of you who are in painful seasons with your children, adult children, who've made choices that have broken your heart, who've stepped away from your faith, or who've pulled away from you entirely. The shame that gets loaded onto a mother in that situation is enormous, and so much of it is unfair. Our culture has a way of making mothers responsible for every outcome in their children's lives. And when things go sideways, shame is right there, whispering the story you already feared. You weren't enough. I know that story personally. I've sat in that heaviness, and I want to offer you something different. What if it's possible to hold your genuine grief about a relationship and a genuine accountability for the places you want to grow without taking on shame that was never yours to carry? You can say, I want to do better in how I show up for my daughter. That's healthy, motivated, and loving. But you don't have to say, I'm the reason everything went wrong. Those are not the same sentence. And learning to tell the difference might be some of the most important work you ever do. Shame is one of the most powerful forces in the human experience. Brené Brown spent many years of her research life trying to understand it precisely because of how much quiet damage it does when we leave it unnamed and unexamined. So today I want to leave with you her 1, 2, 3s as a kind of anchor. We all have it. That makes you normal, not broken. We're all afraid to talk about it, but talking is exactly what heals it. And the less we talk about it, the more control it has over us. So let's keep talking. You are not your worst moments. You are a person who sometimes does things you wish you hadn't. And that makes you exactly like every other human being on this planet, including me. Now, if this episode resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram at seasons_coaching or at my website, www.seasons-coaching.com. And if you're ready to do deeper work on the shame and conflict patterns showing up in your relationships, reach out. That's exactly the kind of transformation we do together in private coaching. Until next time, Keep growing in grace.